Courtship of Harry Potter by Diana Williams. Chapter 3. Supplications. Harry entered the Great Hall in his friend Ron's wake, pausing for a moment to look around him. It was good to be back at Hogwarts, even if he had just had the best Christmas of his life. This year, Dumbledore had finally given into the entreaties of Arthur and Molly Weasley, and Harry had been allowed to spend the holiday with them. He'd had a wonderful time, but Hogwarts was home, and he was glad to be back. He didn't even want to think about leaving here for good in 6 months. The hall was half full of people as students wandered in and out, chatting with their friends and classmates about the holidays, munching on the sandwiches and fruit the house elves had laid out for a casual supper. A glance up at the head table confirmed that nearly all the teachers were there, most of them chatting among themselves. Except for the potions master, of course, who sat silently watching the students. Harry felt Snape's eyes meet his for a minute and hastily looked away. "There's Hermione," Ron was saying as Harry got back up with his friend. "Seamus is here too. They must have taken the early train. Let's sit with them." "Oh, God, will you look at that?" Harry glanced around in the direction Ron was indicating and wasn't surprised to see that his friend was glaring at Draco Malfoy. The blonde Slytherin was surrounded by a group of his cohorts, and he was displaying a handful of large gold-colored cards to them. "Should have known he'd follow that tradition," Ron said disgustedly, turning his back on the Slytherin table as he sat down next to Hermione. "It's obscene." "I don't know about that," Seamus said as Harry sat down beside him and across from Ron. "I'm a bit envious. Not likely that I'll be getting any office, that being a muggle and all." Ron grimaced. "How could you even think about doing something like that?" Seamus shrugged. "Grandad did, and he said it wasn't too bad. Gave him a leg up in local politics." Seamus pointed his fork at Ron. "Better than working for years in some dead-end job at the ministry now, isn't it? Worth putting up with a bit of slap and tickle for that, right? It isn't as if you've got to marry the bloke." "Did it do much for Percy in the end, did it?" Ron retorted. "He had a nervous breakdown and spent 6 months at St. Mungo's. Didn't expect the old man to die on him, did he?" Seamus returned. "Wasn't supposed to fall in love with him, either." "What on earth are you two talking about?" Harry asked, bewildered about what Draco Malfoy's mail could possibly have to do with Percy Weasley. "The Erotstas tradition," Ron said impatiently. "Oh, I've read about that," Hermione said and leaned across the table toward Harry. "It's derived from the Athenian traditions, starting in the late 7th century BC, and was considered an important part of a Greek boy's education. Older wizarding families have practiced it for centuries." "Not all of them," Ron said darkly. "Hush!" Seamus said suddenly, and they turned to look in the direction he was staring. At the head table, Professor Spindlyworm had risen from his seat and smoothed down his robes. As they watched, he picked up a large gold-colored square and headed towards the student tables. Towards the Gryffindor table. Towards Harry. Harry looked up, dumbfounded, as the DADA professor stood across the table from him and gave him a dazzling smile. "Mr. Potter!" "Harry," the man said loud enough for everyone at the surrounding tables to hear him, "I would be honored if you would consider my poor supplication when you make your choice." "Choice?" Harry said blankly. Professor Spindlyworm held out the gold-colored envelope and winked at Harry as if they shared some kind of secret. Automatically, Harry reached out and took the envelope. The professor retained his hold on it for a moment, and as their fingers brushed against each other, Harry couldn't help blushing. Then the DADA teacher released the envelope, bowed to Harry with a flourish, and returned to his seat. "Harry!" Seamus gasped, peering down at the envelope in Harry's hands with a combination of awe and envy. "Professor Worm, you are so bloody lucky!" A sudden movement at the head table interrupted whatever Harry had intended to say. Professor Snape stood up and, with a swirl of his robes, was stalking toward the student tables. Harry glanced over at Draco Malfoy and saw him sit up straighter, preening as he watched the potions master approach and pass right by him. Every eye was focused on Snape. Circling the tables like a large predatory bird, he moved around the end of the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw tables, then around the back of the Gryffindor table as he turned back towards the head table. Not wanting to turn his head to follow Snape's progress, Harry couldn't see him, but he could track his progress by watching the other students' eyes following the man. And he knew when Snape had stopped by the sudden gasp from Ron and the widening of Hermione's eyes. Mr. Potter. The deadly silken voice came from behind him, and Harry closed his eyes, feeling suddenly faint. Fabric brushed against his cheek as something was placed on the table. Then the overwhelming presence was moving away, and Harry reluctantly opened his eyes. Another golden envelope lay on the table in front of him, his name scrawled on the front of it in Snape's distinctive handwriting. Harry's stomach flip-flopped, and he lifted his eyes to see the stricken looks on the faces of both of his friends. And over their shoulders, he could see Draco Malfoy glaring at him from the Slytherin table. With a little moan, he leaned over and thumped his forehead on the table. Why did bizarre things like this always happen to him?